Particle is an IoT platform as a service. So we provide a technology platform to allow manufacturers and businesses who deliver physical products to connect those products to the internet and make them more intelligent.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the IoT For All Podcast, the number one publication and resource for the Internet of Things. I'm your host, Ryan Chacon. If you're watching this on YouTube, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. If you are listening to us on a podcast directory like Apple Podcasts, please feel free to subscribe to get the latest episodes as soon as they are out. All right, on today's episode, we have Zach Supalla, the founder and CEO of Particle. They are an all-in-one hardware software connectivity platform for IoT products and connected devices. Very good conversation today. We talk about what separates good hardware and software businesses from bad hardware and software businesses. We talk about what people can look for and look out for when they are sourcing a company to work with. We talk about a very interesting BMW use case midway through the episode, so check out that, as well as challenges navigating the hardware and software business model and why it is something that Zach is very passionate about helping companies do better. So all in all, very good conversation. I think we get a lot of value out of it. But before we get into it, any of you out there are looking to enter the fast-growing and profitable IoT market, but don't know where to start? Check out our sponsor, Leverage. Leverage's IoT solutions development platform provides everything you need to create turnkey IoT products that you can white label and resell under your own brand. To learn more, go to iotchangeseverything.com. That's iotchangeseverything.com. And without further ado, please enjoy this episode of the IoT For All Podcast. Welcome, Zach, to the IoT For All Podcast. Thanks for being here this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I want to kick this off by having you give a quick introduction about yourself to our audience, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So my name is Zach Supalla. I'm the CEO and founder of Particle. Particle is an IoT platform as a service. So we provide a technology platform to allow manufacturers and businesses who deliver physical products to connect those products to the internet and make them more intelligent. We've been around since 2013, 2014, when we got off the ground. We were originally called Spark and we rebranded to Particle in 2015. We power products wide-ranging from air conditioners to methane emissions monitoring systems to bikes and scooters to logistics products to monitoring medical equipment and operatory equipment, everything in between. So huge variety of customers. And yeah, that's our story.
Fantastic. Anytime I have a founder on the podcast, I always love to hear about kind of the story behind the company coming into existence. And back in 2014-ish, when you started the company, what opportunity did you see in the market? What was kind of the, I guess, aha moment of this is kind of the direction we should go in? And then how has that kind of evolved as the industry has evolved over the last, 8 years or so?
Yeah. So when we started, IoT was, I think, it's in its early days. What we saw, I was inspired by essentially two things. One, companies like Nest were becoming, were sort of becoming popular and showcasing this new set of ideas about how products, machines, equipment could be connected and then could more intelligent and could deliver a better service, essentially. And the way I think about it is every machine has a job to do, and many machines can do their jobs better if they're a little smarter and a little bit more connected. Nest is really the ones that showed the world what this could look like in its best form. And there were a lot of entrepreneurs who popped up in that 2012 to 2015 era of like the sort of hardware startup heyday that were building Nest for X. And that's how Particle started. We were originally a sort of Nest kind of consumer product for lighting. And I was into lighting because my dad is deaf. I wanted to make his lights flash when my mom sent him a text message. Wow. And I wanted lights to have an API. If lights had an API, then I could create an app to do that, and other people could create apps to do different things. We started as essentially a Kickstarter campaign for a connected lighting product that failed. We didn't hit our fundraising goal. And so we were forced to go back to the drawing board and then figure out what to do. And we had discovered in the creation of that product how challenging and complicated the technology stack was for building something like that, and found ourselves surrounded by other entrepreneurs who were struggling with the same kinds of challenges. And so we said, well, we built a bunch of this tech. What if we sold the tech instead of selling the product? And we relaunched 6 months later with a development kit for building an IoT product that was called the Spark Core that we launched on Kickstarter in 2013. We had $10,000 fundraising goal. We raised $600,000 and had
Wow.
5,000 customers who used this to build first prototypes of IoT products. And that really kicked off what would eventually become one of the largest developer communities in the industry of 250,000 developers, developing IoT products on our platform that has now turned into a business selling our platform to companies operating IoT products at scale, many of whom started as an engineer with a dev kit.
Wow. That's fantastic. That's very cool story, kind of having the $10,000 goal and then exceeding it exponentially. What have you kind of seen over the last number of years? Like, how has the company grown over the last number of years from what you were doing then into now and kind of your offering? Is it really evolved due to different technologies being available, use cases being more kind of adopted across industries, or has there been any one key that's kind of helped you all kind of evolve into the company you are today?
The nice thing about starting as a company that sort of formed out of a developer community and people essentially prototyping is
Yep.
we got a lot of visibility into what people were working on.
Mhm.
And in the early days when we first started in that like 2013, 2014 era, there's a lot of consumer stuff, right? Like everybody was looking around their house and trying to figure out like, okay, my lock is going to be connected and my,
Right.
the thermostats and lights and things like that. And I think a lot of those companies struggled, right? I think Nest was an exception in that case, not the rule, which is that the thermostat happens to be a particularly valuable thing that controls a valuable, really, the biggest consumer of energy in your house behind it, right? Like that's sort of what made that product work. Whereas I think and there were some wins, right? Security systems, cameras, door locks, I think have been some of the winning categories in that space. Whereas a ton of other things came and went. And what has come to replace it in the last few years has really been much more of an enterprise and commercial industrial business. And so we find ourselves in things like methane emissions monitoring systems for oil and gas.
Sure,
right?
sure.
Which are, in many cases less visible. A lot of the stuff that we do is like municipal infrastructure kind of stuff, right? And so it's not as sexy as consumer electronics. But it's great business. And at the end of the day, unlike consumer electronics, where a lot of those solutions ended up being kind of gimmicky, in these spaces, it's much more, there's real value. There's safety problems to solve. There's, climate problems to solve. There's economic problems to solve. And so those businesses, whether they're traditional manufacturers, many of our customers are, big companies that have been making widgets for decades,
Right.
or it's entrepreneurial folks that are, kicking off something new. There's a lot of opportunities to chase in that space.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of see the evolution of industries like IoT and kind of seeing a similar path with VR as well, where
Mhm.
it's kind of heavily led with consumer applications. At least it's more forward facing. That's more where it's getting the press, what people are really focused on. But there's this whole industrial, commercial, enterprise application of the technology that kind of comes second, at least to the masses, to really understand the value of the technologies and to be more widely adopted. But
Yeah.
it seems like there is a lot more opportunity. Like when we started IoT for All back in 2016, we were kind of in a similar spot where consumer was leading the way. IoT was still trying to be well understood by companies and how it could be applied to their businesses, what's the value of adopting IoT and so forth. But as that continued to grow, IoT really the market side of it from a commercial enterprise side just grew immensely because the technologies were getting more mature. The costs were coming down. People were seeing successes of these implementations, and starting to really understand how IoT can benefit businesses. And we're seeing that in these other industries with kind of more uh, future kind of forward leaning tech like VRs. It's a very similar kind of path, but it's always interesting to kind of hear somebody talk about seeing something very similar where consumer was kind of leading the way, but as you got into the industrial side, the opportunities just continue to grow and it really good business from there.
Yeah. What we see is, I think that IoT is a technology that can be applied in a lot of different
Sure.
industries. And the right way to apply it is very different depending on what is the thing, what is the asset, what is the problem you're trying to solve.
Of course.
And I think it, usually takes some smart people a little while, like figure out like what's the right problem to solve here. And then once somebody figures it out, you get this kind of S curve of adoption, right? Where the IoT goes, starts with the early adopters, it becomes mass market, and then it starts to become ubiquitous. And I think that IoT as an industry, really, I mean, it's not an industry. It's like 750 industries all roll up together.
Sure.
And that means that there's 750 different S curves, right?
Yep.
So like if we think about some of the consumer categories that we know well, like thermostats are baked, right? Like if you buy a new home, it's almost definitely going to have a smart thermostat in it now. Whereas it wouldn't have 10 years ago, right? The category didn't exist. And so the S curve is complete. And I think things like, cars, for instance, are maybe halfway through that, right? Which is a lot of cars that you buy right now are connected. Not all of them, but probably most if you're buying a new car. And then there's other categories that are just starting to get off the ground or haven't even started yet, right? And I like, I think that a bunch of industrial categories are like barely just getting started. Like one of our big categories is methane emissions, and it's a really good example of there's legislation now to enforce reduction of methane escapes from oil and gas, and like how's that going to get enforced? It's going to get enforced with sensors. And so that industry is just about to get revolutionized, where all of a sudden there's going to be a massive explosion of sensors in oil and gas that weren't there before.
Absolutely.
And that's going to take a few years to roll out, and then that industry is going to be totally turned upside down.
No, I totally agree. How do you all so obviously when we're talking about IoT solutions, you have the hardware component, the software component, the connectivity component, and a lot of companies focus on them individually. What has been your all's approach to that? Are you kind of doing that all in-house? Are you working with partners to kind of bring it all together so that when someone is looking to work with you, kind of everything's handled in one place? Or what is the approach or the view you have kind of on that?
Yeah. So Particle is what we call an integrated IoT platform, which is that we provide to our customers a cloud service that provides device management, over-the-air software updates, data pipeline for managing, processing data flowing through your devices. We provide connectivity. So in the case of Wi-Fi, that's sort of networking stack and setup process to get it provisioned to a network. For cellular, that's SIM cards and data plans. And then we provide the modules that are embedded inside our customers' products. And so we go all the way from the cloud into the device. And I think that's important because a lot of the technical challenges of creating an IoT product live in the kind of surface area in between these things. And so if you take a sort of point solution of, a widget, and you throw in a SIM card, and you sort of take a generic cloud service, the entry point that you can connect to, and you try and hook them all up together, there's this ton of technical challenge in that integration process. And so we can eliminate that by providing this system that's end to end, that really means a customer can look and say, look, my IoT product needs to be secure, scalable, reliable, robust, and it needs to produce data that generates insight for my business. We can deliver that whole thing and be one throat to choke and say, look, if it's working, cool. If it's not working, call us, and we're in a position to fix the problem. And so, that is, I think, that sort of integrated hardware software business is, I think, a lot of what, at the end of the day, it means that we're very similar to our customers, right? Which is that all of our customers who are creating IoT products have a sensor, a machine, a piece of equipment, a device, whatever you want to call it, and then a web service that is the entry point for how people interact with that thing. And they are hardware software businesses. And so I think there's a lot of nuance to how you create a business that is sort of integrated product, also an integrated business model, right? The way that you charge for your product has to accommodate, like, you're selling a widget and also a service attached to it. And what does that mean? And so I recently started a newsletter called Atoms and Bits to discuss specifically the sort of issues that arise in hardware software businesses that are, still pretty new, and there hasn't been a lot of conversation exploring how these things work.
And what would you say are some of the biggest issues or challenges kind of in, from a hardware software business standpoint that maybe it's kind of worth educating our audience on?
I think a couple of the challenges, the way that you operate a pure hardware business and the way that you operate a pure software business are very different. And so I think just coming back to like organization and sort of operating model, like hardware businesses operate on metrics like inventory turns, lead times, very heavy focus on gross margin, right, and sort of profitability of each, like the individual hardware unit, bill of materials optimization. The development process for hardware is sort of the stage gate NPI, new product introduction process that goes through these major stages over a long period of time. Because if you ship a bad piece of hardware to your customers, you're screwed. Like there's nothing you can do, right? Except take it back and fix it. Whereas software operates on an entirely different cadence, right? It's move fast and break things. You can always fix it later. You can rapidly deploy iteration. It's agile as you're shipping new updates every week. And so it's a dramatically different way of operating. So I think first challenge is how do you operate these things together, right? Like how do you create a product where you're very carefully delivering robust hardware solutions that work, and then pushing as much of the complexity into the software side so that you can rapidly iterate on it and make changes and make improvements to your product over time. And what does sort of this agile development of a hardware software product look like? This is one challenge. Second is, I think, business model, which is how do you charge for the thing, right? And there's a variety of ways you can charge for it, ranging from a traditional hardware sale where you basically say, look, I'm selling you a widget the same way widgets have always been sold. You buy them for more than it costs me to sell it to you, traditional hardware sale, where I'm going to take the cost of running like the web and cloud services that power the thing, and it's just going to erode my margin over time, versus a full subscription model where you say, look, hardware's free. Here's the device. You don't have to pay me for it. What you're paying me for is the service that it provides. If you stop using the service, you just send back the hardware. And that's a much more sort of SaaS-like model, hardware as a service. And there's a ton of versions in between. And I think that the figuring out where you fit, and at the end of the day, the closer you are to hardware as a service, the more robust your business is. It's hard to do it. And so I wrote an issue in my newsletter recently about BMW charging for heated seats as a service, a subscription for the ability to look on the heated seats. And it's just like, well, that's the wrong way to do it.
Yeah,
that's just everybody off, right?
What was the reasoning behind that? I didn't really read into it much, but I saw kind of a headline about it. What was the justification for thinking that's a good idea?
So I'll tell you what I think they thought they were doing.
Okay,
they were taking a feature. The typical way that features like that are sold in cars, right?
You buy it exactly.
You buy the premium package that costs like $3,000 more, that includes the heated seats and like a bunch of other stuff.
I got you. Okay.
And so they're basically saying like, look, instead of spending $3,000, you can spend $15 a month. Doesn't that seem better? And so I can see why they thought that would land, right?
Sure.
But the problem is that you're not replacing $3,000 with $13 a month. The thing that people really struggled with was this idea of being nickeled and dimed, or like micro.
That's how it had probably felt that way, right?
Yeah, because it's like, it's not just it's $13 a month for like a tiny little feature. And so you sort of imagine this world, and they honestly have created this world because there's like 25 things you can subscribe to, where it's like, well, I'm paying $13 a month for my seats, and $5 a month for my heated steering wheel, and $10 a month for the fog lights. And it's like, then you can imagine the bill that you get looks like a CVS receipt, right?
I wonder also, like, you live in certain regions of the world, and, like for me, I don't need, you're on the East Coast also, but we don't need heated seats and heated steering wheel for a certain amount of months out of the year. So is that maybe part of their reasoning too? It's like, look, you can turn this off when you don't need it. You don't need it for an extra month. So why are you paying for it? But when you do buy a car, it's assume you're not paying cash for it, you can bake all of that cost for the premium features and stuff into the loan that you get, and you're kind of like, you're done with it once you're paying it for it monthly.
I think so. What you just said is, I think, what the correct way to do it is, like, in my issue of the newsletter, I presented a sort of alternative solution, which is, imagine the winter package, right? And the winter package is like heated seats, heated steering wheel, some like steering features that make it easier to drive on ice, like a bunch of stuff that is for winter cars. And like, if you live in California, you'd never buy this. It's not relevant to you. If you live somewhere cold, you can subscribe to it for the number of months that it's going to be cold in the place that you live, which depends on where you are. And every year you can sign up for your like winter package and, pay a couple $100 for the season to have it or not, if you're not driving or you're not going to be, using that much. That's a better packaging. I think the issue with BMW, and this is really where it comes down to, is like, it matters a lot how you present this to the customer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can screw it up very easily, but if you package it well, that makes the customer feel like this is in my benefit, this is better for me, then this stuff totally works.
Yeah, the interesting thing too is a lot of these technologies, I wonder, and I don't know enough about car manufacturing for this, but in order to have the ability to have a feature to turn on and off, it has to be installed in the car. So for instance, my car, I was like a winter or cold package, heating steering wheel, heated seats, a couple other things, but if I didn't get that, I don't know if my car didn't have the capabilities then, so it wasn't built into the cost. So if you buy a BMW and you say no to all this stuff, they still had to build and put the tech into the car in case you do want to turn on one day. Is that cost then somehow hidden in the price of the car? Because it's not free for a BMW to do that.
Well, so that's a good question. And I think this is where, I think the consumer idea, like, let's say I'm buying an oven and there's 3 models. There's the good, better, best model, and the good one goes to 450 and the better one goes to 500 degrees and the best one goes to 550. Right. And like, I'm going to pay a little bit more. I think that we have the assumption that like the design of these 3 ovens is very different. And so when I'm spending extra money for the one that goes up to be higher, there's like some cost in the machine. That may or may not be true. Like a lot of times the way that companies create these good, better, best tiers is with like a chip that's handicapped, right?
Right, so yeah.
It's software, right? And that's been true for a long time. Like that precedes IoT, right? And so, but we just don't know that. And so I think the thing that pisses off a consumer is when you say, well, you can activate it with a subscription, and the consumer's like, but it's in there.
Yeah, right. Like I think I've seen this, and again, I could be completely wrong on this, but I believe I remember reading about this with the new Apple MacBooks, that they have with their new chips and their new processing power and everything. They have the full system in there for you to use, but if you do not pay for the upgraded version, it is not basically accessible to you.
Right.
So it's a very interesting kind of model. And when I first read it, I was like, yes, but it's there. Like, why can't I just use it? But it's like, no, you need to basically have bought that upgrade when you bought the computer. It just seemed very interesting.
Silicon has worked that way forever because at the end of the day, silicon starts with a binning process, which is like if you're making a processor with a certain ability to compute, the manufacturing process leads to some errors that mean that like you will end up with some processors that can run at 2.4 gigahertz and some that can run at 2.2 gigahertz and so silicon has always been like one manufacturing process that produces multiple variants. And so that idea has been there forever in silicon. Again, we just don't we're often not aware of it, right? We become aware of it when people start to like overclock this stuff, right? And sort of hack it to open up these features. I think that's been true in silicon for a while. The fact that it's now happening in other areas starts to freak people out. But at the end of the day, this is where I think it's ideas that come from software, right? Like SaaS subscriptions. It does not, if you are using Slack and you're on the like free tier or the tier that gives you like 30 days of history of your messages or whatever, then you can pay more for like, infinite history. It's like, it doesn't really cost Slack that much more money to generate the infinite history. It might cost them, they might be storing that data either way. And so it might not cost them anything at all. They're just differentiating pricing for different people who are willing to pay different amounts. And I think that makes people uncomfortable. But I honestly think it's something that people will just get used to as it becomes more common because we've gotten used to it in software, right? Like I think that the same thing will happen in hardware.
Yeah, I think there's elements of it that do frustrate people because everyone judges those features as puts a value on those features. And some people are like, well, I feel like this should just be part of it versus people who are like, oh, I understand why there's an upcharge for accessing these features and things like that. So I think we're always going to have that battle. But again, like you mentioned earlier, it's all about how you package and how it's sold to the end user, to whether it's successful or not.
Totally. 100%. I think there's a way to do it that makes the consumer, the end user feel like, I really like that they did it this way because this fits, like I get exactly what I want, right?
Exactly.
And there's another way to do it, which is it's positioned in a way that feels like it's designed to make the company make more money,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you can definitely get it really right, and you can get it really wrong.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I did want to kind of go back to a part of the conversation we had before we got into this, the BMW use case, and then and down this road. We were talking about the kind of the hardware, software businesses, and there are a lot of companies out there who kind of define themselves as this. If someone who's listening to this is out there trying to find a company to work with in the IoT space, what do you feel separates kind of the good versus, and I don't want to say bad, but just the not as good hardware software businesses from each other? And how should people, or what should people be looking out for or looking for when it comes to kind of sourcing these organizations to decide who's the best to kind of move forward with for whatever it is that they're working on?
Yeah. Do you mean like on the sort of platform technology side, or in terms of like final end products that are delivered to the customer?
Either or. I mean, it's more so like, let's say you're starting your IoT journey and you're kind of out there looking, and there's hardware software businesses out there.
Mhm.
And just what should they be taking into consideration during that search?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that if we look at, I think the sort of the good companies in this space, right? Treat their products as an integrated, holistic solution, where the technology is just like a means to an end, right? And what the hardware does versus what the software does, it's irrelevant, right? Like what matters is, what is the problem you're solving? How do you solve it? How do you solve it better than the next person?
Right.
I think companies that do that take a challenging problem and deliver a great solution to it, um, uh, will win every single day of the week. When you're buying from a company, whether you are a consumer buying a consumer product, or whether you're a business buying a machine or a sensor or something that's going to make your business operate better, or whether you're a company building an IoT product looking for a platform like us, right? Uh, if you find they provide a better solution, chances are that company is going to be successful. And if that company is successful, then you will have a good, improving product that I do think you should watch out for, like products that improve over time. I think that's a requirement in our space.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get that, you're going to be a really happy customer.
Right.
If you pick a cheaper solution, if you pick something that's like a little janky but has potential, I think you're risking a lot, because there are a lot of concerns about like IoT companies going out of business, right? We've seen this a lot in the consumer space of like, well, that thing just stopped working because the company that made it doesn't exist anymore. And what do you do, right? And so I think those are things to watch out for. You kind of have to evaluate the business when you buy a product and say, like, do I believe this is a robust business this company's running? And if so, cool. All right, I feel confident in buying this.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an interesting just landscape in general, and how companies are, or I guess companies looking to adopt IoT are kind of going about the buying process.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what I guess outside of that in general, what advice do you have for companies out there looking to adopt IoT, and kind of how to approach that that journey?
Yeah. I think that there's sort of two ways that companies approach IoT. And I think that I think there's a better way and a worse way. I'll start with the better way. I think that the best way to approach IoT is to be aware of it as a technology and a capability, and then not think about it, but rather think about the biggest problems of your business and
Mm,
think, how could I solve that problem today, and how could IoT potentially play a role in that? So, for instance, if you're in oil and gas right now, there's new legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act,
sure.
which is a climate bill in disguise, right? Implements new rules that say you need to reduce methane emissions. How are you going to do that? How are you going to even detect that you are emitting
Mm,
methane, right?
right.
Like, you have a problem to solve, and that problem will end up with an IoT solution, right? Which is the solution to this problem is going to be a sensor deployed in your site, or a variety of sensors that are going to monitor methane levels and tell you immediately when there's a problem, so you can fix it as fast as possible, because it's going to cost you money if you don't. Um, if you work from problem back to solution, you end up, I think, with a really good fit. I think the other way, which is the worst way, and we see this a lot, is when companies build some kind of a sort of innovation group, or that
Mm,
basically says, my job is to figure out how we're going to adopt new technologies. And
right.
so
Right.
end
Right.
up like, if I
Right.
end up on a phone call with a prospective customer, they say, well, look, my job is to try and figure out how like IoT, AR, VR, blockchain,
Yep.
5G are relevant to our business. It's like, I need to get off this phone call. Like
I totally agree. I mean, and the way I've always thought about it through past discussions is, there's two parts to this. One is, like you said, making sure there's a problem they're trying to solve and then working backwards from that on how to solve it.
Yeah.
The other is, once you start solving it, how do you build something that's going to be successful? And I think a big part of that is thinking about the end user and who's going to be interacting with this on a regular basis and building it for them, or backwards from them. But yeah, I think those that come out and say, yeah, we're just trying to learn about how IoT can work in our business, like, there's an interesting conversation to be had when you address or you bring up problems that they may not realize and be like, oh, so you've actually built things for companies in my space that help them do X, Y, and Z. I didn't even know that was possible. Great. Let's talk about adoption versus we're just doing it to check a box. And I think that's where you start to get, you start to really good, run into a lot of tire kickers and companies that are just going to not worth the time of those true IoT companies looking to build solutions that actually matter.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Fantastic. Yeah, we actually hit all the points I want to talk to through all this, these little tangents and stuff. It's been a fantastic conversation. Let me ask, for our audience out there who wants to learn more and about Particle, about what you have going on, follow up with any questions, maybe just dive into kind of future or further on some of the topics that we're talking about here. What is the best way that they can do that? And also, where can they find your newsletter?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple different things. If you're interested in learning more about Particle, our website is www.particle.io. And you can either, if you are technical and want to just poke around, we have development kits you can use to get up and running and prototype. If you're coming at it more from a business angle and you want to talk to a salesperson to understand how could this help improve my business, you can reach out to our sales team. They'd be delighted to chat with you. If you are interested in learning more about hardware, software, business models, and generally how businesses are thinking about transforming in the sort of modern age with more connected, intelligent devices, my newsletter is called Atoms and Bits. It's at atomsandbits.io.
Okay.
I post, if you subscribe, it's a Substack. So if you subscribe, you'll get my newsletter in your inbox. And it's a combination of written essays and also interviews with founders, investors in the space, folks who are looking at IoT and thinking about how you solve problems. And if you're interested in just following me and hearing stuff, keeping track of what I'm up to, I am at ZS on Twitter.
Fantastic. Well, Zach, thank you so much. We're going to make sure that all of the stuff for Particle, as well as your newsletter, is linked up in the description and the content that we put out to promote this. Fantastic conversation. Really enjoyed it. And I think our audience is going to get a lot of value out of it. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Likewise. Thanks, Ryan.
All right, everyone. Thanks again for watching that episode of the IoT For All podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please click the thumbs up button, subscribe to our channel, and be sure to hit the bell notification so you get the latest episodes as soon as they become available. Other than that, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.